Hey everyone, welcome. April Fool's Day. We're doing chapter 4. And oh, someone already put a comment in the chat. Enjoyed the Lucas interview you just posted on YouTube. Oh, thank you. Yeah, I just did an interview about anxiety with one of my clients that just finished up a 3-month package. And he just talks about how this approach helped him so much more than the other things he tried. So really good stuff. Yeah, you can always find my stuff on YouTube or on like on my, well, I guess it's not really, information's on my website, but I was going to say it's on my YouTube or my podcast, anywhere you listen to podcasts. It's called Unstoppable Body and Mind. I was thinking for a minute because I have stuff everywhere, YouTube and Facebook and Instagram and TikTok. Okay, anyway, let's go to our screen sharing. We'll go through our chapter 4, which is about determining if you have mind-body syndrome, which is the question everyone usually wants to know. And this can apply to anxiety and depression. We'll talk specifically about those, but this gets into the same stuff that is in Unlearn Your Pain. So the workbook part, just like we've always said, you treat anxiety and depression the same way that you would treat chronic pain. And this is the first part of it, gathering evidence, figuring out your history, and we're going to go through all of that. There, share the screen. I should be able to still see the chat if you guys want to pop in any thoughts, questions, comments in the meantime. Okay, let's do this. Present. Okay. So, is my anxiety and or depression caused by mind-body syndrome? I love this quote. Fears are educated into us and can, if we wish, be educated out. That's what we're talking about with unlearning your pain, unlearning your anxiety and depression. So you do want to make sure that you have been checked out by your doctor. Such the diagnoses or disorders such as hyperthyroidism, pheochromocytoma, wow, pheochromocytoma, I might have said that wrong, sleep disorders, heart disorders, or other relatively rare conditions can cause anxiety. But also mind-body syndrome can cause things like sleep conditions, sleep disorders. So there are a very few medical conditions that he would say are not mind-body syndrome for anxiety. And for depression, it would be low testosterone levels in men, adrenal insufficiency, or other disorders that can cause depression. But it is rare to have testosterone or adrenal hormone levels that are low enough to cause depression. So you may be diagnosed with low testosterone or low T or adrenal fatigue, but those conditions are unlikely to be the cause of the depression. So as we'll talk about later, the cause is often these neural circuits, this freeze type reaction or flight reaction to stressful events. So those things can actually cause your hormone levels to be off. It can cause things like adrenal fatigue. So going the medical route is really good to rule out that there's not something like cancer or a tumor or things like fractures if you have pain. But again, you just want to be careful with what medical advice you're given, because sometimes they'll give you a diagnosis that's actually something that's mind body. Okay, so he goes through a bunch of case studies, and I didn't make slides for all of them, but what I really liked to do so that you get a sense of what this work is going to help you with in your life is just going over what they learned. So I didn't talk about all of their symptoms and how they developed and why, but just listen for these general types of things. See if you struggle with some of these things that they're struggling with. Okay, try to, apply it to your own life. So Philip learned that he was a good person who had difficulties in his life that had resulted in his symptoms. He learned that he didn't need to be perfect and instead worked towards accepting himself as he was. He learned that his anxiety was learned rather than genetically determined and inalterable. Through mindfulness and cognitive therapy, he's learned to take control over the anxiety. More importantly, Philip realized there's been a lot of anger and other negative emotions lurking underneath his anxiety, and he's learned that he can express these emotions and let them go. So this is the multi layers of things, right? So it's just like there's some techniques for overcoming anxiety, there's the cognitive approach, and then there's these negative emotions that he's starting to realize that he had. He's been able to overcome many of his phobias by facing them rather than avoiding them. Philip is also much better at handling the major issues in his life, such as illness, death, and dying. He says, yes, I have anxiety like everyone else, but I don't dread living each day and can enjoy my life. Okay, and then Teresa was constantly checking herself for lumps that might indicate cancer. So she did have someone in her life that found a lump and passed away. And she, as a child, had a cat that got a lump and had to be euthanized when they took it to the vet. So starting very early, she has this sensitivity towards, this is a danger in my life. Her nervous system's on high alert about it. So she would make frequent visits to the doctor looking for reassurance that she wasn't dying. And what she learned was how the events of her life had created learned neural pathways of anxiety. She started reminding herself that she was okay and not damaged, that her feelings of worry would not harm her and would pass. Sorry, I'm just getting that chat up there. um, okay, and pass. Where did that go? She learned techniques to calm herself and she began to feel better. She learned to recognize other source of stresses in her life, such as annoyance and resentments related to her relationships with family members or friends, and began to deal with those. So as we'll see, this has a lot to do with our personality traits, some of this work, and learning to stand up for ourselves and not being people pleasers or hard on ourselves. So we'll talk more about that, but this is like a whole lifestyle change. This isn't just learn a few techniques to decrease these symptoms and then never have to do it again. It's like it when you lose weight and it's like a fad diet versus a lifestyle change that's sustainable and that's comfortable and that actually really helps you in the long term. Okay, so Ronald learned that the original source of his depression and anxiety was his mother's treatment of him, which caused him to feel devalued and therefore to devalue himself. He learned that his symptoms of anxiety were present because of the hurts he had suffered and the subsequent patterns that his brain had learned. Most importantly, he learned that he could change these patterns by doing the difficult but very rewarding work of facing the issues in his life and making changes in order to take control of his life. Expressing long held feelings towards his mother and others, including his bosses who had treated him poorly, in the safety of a therapeutic setting helped him to feel much better. So you don't have to necessarily, maybe someone who had an effect in your life has passed on, or you're not in contact with them anymore. So you really just need to do it in a certain, way. It doesn't have to be to that person, but he'll talk about like letters you can write and never send and ways to express anger therapeutically. Um, and, coaches and practitioners, and there are people that can help you, therapists as well can help you with that. So he took those lessons back out into the real world and he learned to stand up for himself. He began to feel powerful and act more assertively in relation to his symptoms, to his mother, and to his bosses. Ronald learned that he had value and that he could care for himself, love himself, and protect himself. He still gets anxious at times, especially when he's in a new situation. Like this is the thing, we'll still have some anxiety at times. It's actually healthy and good to have the whole range of emotions and just know how to deal with them. So he has learned that he can handle new situations and he uses a variety of affirmations and self-talk to process the feelings that emerge. I love how later in the book he'll say something like, "These are all skills that even people that don't have mind-body syndrome, it's good for them to learn," right? And if you look at it from the nervous system perspective like I do, these personality traits are really going into fight or flight or freeze. And so we're like regulating our nervous system, which is what, again, a lot of people work on, even if they don't have these physical symptoms. Okay, so a warning regarding severe symptoms. Individuals can become completely overwhelmed by anxiety disorders, and the panic attacks have physical effects in the body, and they might require medical attention and maybe even medication or hospitalization. And that is, you know, something that needs to be taken care of first in order to do this work. Severe depression is a much different disorder than mild to moderate depression. So again, when he talks about the placebo studies, mild and moderate depression, medications were like about the same as a placebo. But for severe depression, medications do work. And so better than the placebo. So, what's interesting is they do say that mild depression may even have some benefits. So, if you think about it, like a lot of artists and poets and creative people, they've had a lot of pain in their lives that has caused them to, write this beautiful music or paint this moving piece, right? So, being down at times is part of being human. And the experience may give us some space to ponder our situation, whether we're going through the breakup of a relationship or considering the existential question of life and death, which may well help them develop inner strength, wisdom, and confidence. So, again, we're not trying to just like eliminate anxiety completely, that flight response, eliminate depression, that we would ever go into freeze. We just want to realize, we can even realize, I guess, that this can help us. This can give us inner strength, confidence, and wisdom. When we see it more like that, it's easier to move through it as well. So then severe depression may be a different biological entity. Antidepressants, as I said, have been shown to have a positive benefit for those with severe depression. And people who are severely depressed, it's harder for them to just get in, do this work, pull themselves out of it without significant therapeutic help. And because they're at a higher risk for suicide, it would be important to have that involvement with another person like a therapist and the family and connections for monitoring. So if you are feeling like you're falling into that category, then he doesn't say that you can't be helped at all from this work. Just think of using outside sources as well and not beating yourself up if you're like, how come I can't figure this out and everyone else is able to? Okay. And then someone last week asked about bipolar. So I'm so glad he talks about it here. Bipolar disorder is an enigmatic problem, mysterious problem that can vary widely. So it's on a spectrum, mild to severe. Severe bipolar is usually biological and requires treatment with medications known as stabilizers, along with psychotherapy. But he even talks about how the DSM, the diagnostic manual for giving diagnoses, has changed. There's two forms of bipolar, and one is a milder form, and they're more likely to have depression and irritability or angry outbursts. And that is more likely due to the stressful life events that this book could help with. So, anxiety and depression are common reactions to stress. It's common for all of us to have this. And overactivation of fight or flight creates anxiety, as we've talked about. Flight usually is anxiety. And overactivation of the freeze or submit reaction causes depression. And it does often go one and then the other. So it would be easy to see if you're more on the mild side, that this can even happen. Like I've seen it happen with kids. For example, I was watching this girl at the soccer game. She was probably like 5 or 6. and she would play and play and she was laughing, and then she got a little bit hurt and she was crying, and then her mom made her laugh again and she was laughing, right? And so not to minimize that there are some people with severe forms of this disease, but also just to realize, like, the more we see this as fluid, we can go into and out of these states. They're just nervous system responses that can be rewired. Then we don't see it so much as something that's fixed and, genetic, and we'll have to live this certain way the rest of our lives. And then, as we know, there is a great overlap between anxiety, depression, and chronic pain. And this is just because of those neural circuits in the brain. Stressful life events create learned neural circuits that can cause virtually any symptom to occur. Like, sometimes people are like, well, what about really severe symptoms? That must mean it's bad. It's over my whole body. That's have even more evidence that it's mind body and not something structural. And we'll go through the fit criteria, which is how to determine like what kinds of things are more neural circuit versus how it would behave if it's not. But anything from nausea and digestion problems and headaches and tinnitus and dizziness and, all these things. In our society, the symptoms that commonly occur in response to powerful unresolved emotions are anxiety, depression, chronic fatigue, insomnia, irritable bowel, and bladder syndromes, and many different types of chronic pain syndromes. I got this little list from Unlearn Your Pain, and he has one also in this book. And so the only difference I saw was that he had added multiple chemical sensitivities to this list. It looked like the rest was right. And he actually changed this to chronic regional pain syndrome instead of, I think he put it as complex. Yeah. So anyway, so you can take a look at this list. Have you guys looked over this list to see if yours is listed? That is always nice when yours is listed. It doesn't mean that if it's not listed that it's not mind body, but a lot of things, like really even severe diagnoses, can be caused by this stress response. Okay, so this gets to kind of the workbook part where we're going to start going through some lists, thinking back, going through your childhood. And step one is just to identify any of the symptoms you might have ever had in your whole life that are mind body or typically mind body. So you might go through and, maybe you remember that you had some rashes when you were a kid, or that you had, as I've done this work, there are a few things that I'm like, oh yeah, I did have, I had an eating disorder. I don't think that's on there, but he does talk at other places about eating disorder. Oh yeah, it's number 10. He has, there are different things that I didn't realize that I had kind of had that were mind body. I had tons of sore throats as a kid. I had a lot of stomach issues as a kid. And yeah, go through this list. And then we're going to talk about the fit criteria. And this is a really great list that Dr. Schubiner has put together. Knowing how your body would behave, your physiology would react if there was an injury versus if it's mind body. So if you go through this list and you see that you have one or more of them, then you can actually rule in that you have mind body syndrome. So a lot of times you go to a doctor to rule something in or out. And so just think of this is as powerful to rule in that it's mind body as to rule it out by a bunch of other testing. Okay. So functional, this means the symptoms of mind-body syndrome do not fit with and are not explainable by known structural conditions. So here's how you know, here are some of the ideas of how you would know that it's mind-body syndrome in this functional way. Symptoms begin without a physical precipitation. So this is a lot of times more for the pain, right? Where someone just says, my shoulder just started hurting. I don't know why. I woke up with it like this. I was really stressed with my schooling, and then I got these migraines. So there was no accident or anything that would have caused it. It just started on its own. Symptoms persist after an injury has healed. So all injuries heal and scars do not cause pain. This was a really weird thing for me to understand at first, because that's not how I was trained as a physical therapist, but actually physical therapists are being trained differently now. Not all pain means that there's damage and that injuries heal. So if you had an accident, but it was 7 years ago, it's very unlikely that anything structural is going on because that injury has healed. It healed within the first 3 to 6 months or weeks. No, months. I'm sorry, what am I saying? 3 to 6 months. I confused myself because even bones will heal in like 6 to 8 weeks. So 6 months is actually like a really generous amount of time for healing. And even though they might say, well, there was a ton of scar tissue, we know that scars don't cause pain. And what if the scar tissue is on a nerve? Dr. Schubiner says he has two bulging discs that are compressing on a nerve and doesn't have neck pain. So just keep that in mind if it's an older injury. Symptoms that are in a distribution pattern that's symmetric in the body. So if it's a mirror image on the right and left side. So if someone says, both my wrists started hurting the same time, and it's like, well, why would that happen, that both start hurting exactly the same? Or both feet went numb, or both sides of my jaw. Symptoms occur on one whole side of the body or half of the face, head, or torso. So if we're thinking of, where muscles run, where nerves run, there isn't just like one thing that runs down the whole right side of the body. So it's a little more suspicious if all of the right side is affected and the left is not, or if it's half of the face. Symptoms spread over time to different areas of the body. This is such a big one. And a lot of times, as a physical therapist, I would say, well, it's compensating. This lower part of your back is tight. And so then the upper part is compensating, right? But we don't want to look at it like that. We just want to see, does it move around? Is it different from day to day? And has it spread since the initial thing? It started in my shoulder, now it hurts all the way down my arm, or started my lower back and now it hurts in my mid back and my neck. And then symptoms radiate to the opposite side of the body or down a whole leg or arm. Unlike nerve pain, that would affect just a part of the leg or arm where the nerve is located, right? So if people are like, oh, it's the whole arm, front, back, there's not a nerve that runs like that. So we know it's neuroplastic. And one thing that I heard, I'll just put it in really quickly. I was doing a bunch of continuing education for my physical therapy degree. And they talked about how they call it central sensitization now with PTs. And so it's like your whole central nervous system is more sensitized. And they called it, one of the teachers called it a noisy neighbor phenomenon. So if you think of an apartment building and there's one noisy neighbor, and then the downstairs neighbors like yelling for them to be quiet, and then more neighbors wake up because of that guy, and so then they're all yelling for other people to be quiet, and then police get called and everyone on the block is awake, right? So that's kind of what happens with this sensitization. It can start with one thing, and then because it's like a hearing aid that's turned up so high, any little thing, we can start to get feedback from that. So think of that. That's what I always think when symptoms spread, is that noisy neighbor. Symptoms that occur in many different body parts at the same time, also a clue that it's the whole nervous system in a state rather than, this injury and that injury and this. Symptoms that have the quality of tingling, electric, burning, numb, hot, or cold. So as long as they've ruled out that there's not nerve damage, those things, you usually think of these as nerve pain, but the brain can produce that. The brain can produce it even when there's no impinged nerve or no damaged nerve. So it's actually quite common that if you have these symptoms, that it's mind-body syndrome, which is, I know, it's weird. A lot of times people are like, well, the muscle spasms, I get that because of the tension. But if it feels like a nerve, then it's got to be, that must be a damaged nerve. But damaged nerves will have weakness. They'll maybe even atrophy, and it'll be constant. It won't come and go. Okay, that's a good segue. Inconsistent. So this means that the symptoms would vary in ways that a structural condition would not. They always use the example, if your arm is broken, it's not like it just stops hurting for a while and then it starts hurting again. If the bone is newly broken, especially if it's not, set, like it's going to hurt every time you move it. So, symptoms that shift from one location of the body to another, either within hours, days, or weeks at a time. So, we've kind of talked about that. If that moves around, it's not a sign that you're compensating and you need to be more strong or aligned. People with horrible posture don't all have chronic pain. So, if things are shifting around, don't look for that structural explanation. It actually is a sign that it's mind body. Symptoms are more or less intense depending on the time of the day or occurring first thing in the morning or in the middle of the night. This is due to subconscious brain activity. So anyone that tells me, oh, it's worse at night or first thing in the morning, that's what he's talking about here. That's inconsistent. Why would the arm hurt if it's broken, one time of day versus another? It wouldn't. It would always hurt. Symptoms occur after, but not during activity or exercise. So if I hear this all the time, I was doing this, we were four-wheeling and it felt fine. And we were bumping up and down on the seat. And then I even had one lady tell me she was on vacation and it started a week later when she got home, her pain started. And her PT had told her it was from that bumping when she was doing that four-wheeling on vacation. But that had happened like a week before and she had no pain with it. So usually what we do is we just think, what did I last do? Or what did I last eat? But if you weren't having pain during that time you were playing pickleball or whatever you were doing, you might have some delayed onset muscle soreness, that normal soreness after working out. But if it causes a huge pain flare, it does not mean that you've injured yourself. It just means that you have a really good case that it's neuroplastic, a really, really good case. By the way, don't flip this around and use this the opposite way. So I've had people say, well, mine did occur during activity, so therefore mine must be structural. It doesn't work that way. So only use these the way that they're written. And if it fills that criteria, you can check it off and say, yes, that applies to me. And like he said, you only need one of these to make a case that you have mind body syndrome. And then, of course, the more you have, the stronger your case. Okay, so don't use that one against you, but definitely if you've been doing an activity and then went to bed, you were fine, and you woke up in the morning and were hurting, likely it's mind body. Symptoms occur when someone or when one thinks about them or when someone asks about them. This is great. I always know if I'm like on a call with someone and their pain gets worse when we're talking about it, that is neuroplastic. Symptoms occur when stress is increased or one thinks about stressful situations. So I've had people, well, here's one example that came to mind for me. I was talking to my dad a few years ago about Thanksgiving, and my neck and shoulder started hurting right during that conversation out of the blue, right? So it's very common that I see that as well. And it doesn't always correlate, like, it wasn't just like, I had stress and anxiety. I actually had a physical pain in my body, but that's how we know these emotions and the nervous system works. Okay, so symptoms are minimal or non-existent when engaged in joyful or distracting activities, such as when on vacation or when not thinking about the symptoms. So this is such a good one. don't think that you're just really good at ignoring the pain if you don't have it sometimes, or it's way less when you're distracted. Okay. Sometimes people say it's always there. The pain is always there, but sometimes I just don't notice it. That's just not true as far as how we know pain works. Pain is created in the consciousness, in the brain. And so if you're not feeling the pain because you're watching a really good movie or you're talking to your friends, and then all of a sudden you realize like, oh, I don't have any pain right now, it's because it wasn't there. Okay. So, really, this is one of the best things to look for. Any detective for the opposite kind of moments. Alan Gordon in his book talks about where he had just constant back pain for years. And one time he was at a basketball game that was so exciting, double overtime, and all of a sudden he realized his pain was totally gone. And I think it lasted that way just for a few hours or till the next day or something. But look for those moments, and especially if you're doing something fun or distracting. Oh, I'm going to read this real quick. Mary says, 2 nights ago, I woke up in the middle of the night with a pain in my mid back. I don't usually have pain there. So I got up for a minute and moved, and then told myself I was okay and went back to bed. Pain wasn't there in the morning. Yes, that's awesome. Yeah, those little twingy things. Sometimes I would think, oh, my neck is in this certain position. When I started dancing, I would sometimes get some neck pain. And the more I was just like, it's okay. My neck loves to move in all these different positions. It's healthy for it. It feels good. I started noticing the symptoms lasted less and less. And then my brain just stopped producing it when I would dance. Okay. Anyway, I get a little off topic with these stories, but I try to at least, kind of give you some real life examples as well. So symptoms are minimal or non-existent after some kind of therapy, such as massage, chiropractic, Reiki, acupuncture, an herbal or vitamin supplement. Why does this work? Because we're calming the nervous system, right? You're like, I believe this new pill that they said is going to be really good is going to help me. That calms the nervous system, and the symptoms do actually decrease. So there's so many times I hear people say like, okay, if I go to the chiropractor, I'm good for this many days. Or, there was one time I got Reiki and my symptoms were totally gone, big red flag that it's actually a mind body syndrome symptom. Okay, and then the last group of classification is the triggered, and this means that the symptoms are brought on by stimuli that would not actually cause symptoms physically, but they activate the brain to generate the symptom. So what does that mean? Symptoms that, shouldn't cause pain as if there's damage to tissue, but it could. So this could be things like foods, smells, sounds, light. That's a big one for a lot of people, right? Sensitivity to light, computer screens causing, headaches and stuff. He's saying, no, these are just normal things in our environment. They only cause a problem when your nervous system's on high alert. Menses. Okay, this is a interesting one. It's kind of bold. I think that he says it. And I love that he says that because I've helped so many people challenge those beliefs about something with their cycle. My back pain always happens with my cycle. It's happened every time since I was 12 and started my period. So I know it's something with my hormones. When they start being detective for the opposite and looking for those patterns and really seeing, I've had people come back the next day and they're like, oh, I thought I would always have back pain with my period, and this time I didn't. So I'm just saying, this isn't to start a fight or anything. And definitely, women go through a lot of hormonal changes, no doubt. But when the nervous system's at that high alert state, it's like those changes are amplified. So what we need to do is just, tune that all down, and tune down, all the fear and these nervous system responses basically. And then we can have like, that's something that doesn't cause symptoms in every single person that's that has menses, right? So anyway, I like talking about that kind of stuff, but I've made a few people mad about it. So please don't get offended. Just see it as like there's maybe some hope. Maybe there's a possibility that these migraines aren't just going to happen every time I have my period or whatever. Okay. And changes in the weather. Dr. Schubiner loves to talk about this one too, because again, kind of controversial. And I think a little more evidence for the weather one than the hormones. So weather has been shown in research not to increase pain, despite what most people think. Okay, so there's actually some articles Dr. Schubiner has sent out recently about how another finding that weather changes did not actually affect pain. But it seems to be so like we might not even know what the weather's going to be when we feel our pain. And so it seems like there's something about it. But you know, our brain tends to reinforce what it already believes and see what it already believes. So maybe you had pain on another day that the weather hadn't changed, but then you're like, well, it's because I walked my dog too far or something, right? So just keep your mind open. And conditioned response. Yeah, yeah. I think you could call them like conditioned responses, right? Like your you know, eh, you notice this pattern, this thing happened, and it was a really rainy day. And so then in the future, and you hear a lot about that too, right? Oh, my aching joints. Oh, I can tell when a storm's coming. So yeah, conditioned responses and probably nocebo, which is like believing that you're going to get something because of a certain condition or specific movements. Okay, so this was a long one. We're going through it all. So let's talk just a minute about the specific movements because that's a really interesting one too. I'll give this example of I had one where this end joint in my finger was hurting only when I would bend it. And so I was like, ugh, like I think all of this kind of stuff is mind body, but it really doesn't hurt any other time, but every time I bend it, it does. And of course, my mind went to like, maybe there's some arthritis or maybe there's some gout. I've heard of gout, like crystals. I was imagining like, ooh, it feels like painful crystals in there. My mind was going to those places, but I just, didn't stress about it and was just curious about it. And it would like come and go, I noticed a few times. And then one time I had it and my jaw was hurting. So I was like, I've got to do some journaling. I think something's going on. So I journaled for like 10, 15 minutes and found some emotions I didn't realize were so strong and, just kind of raged on the page and got it all out. And both my jaw and my finger pain went away. So sometimes people will say, but it's just when I move my shoulder a certain way and I'm not thinking about it. And how could my brain cause that? Because it's just with this movement. Yeah, it's that predictive coding. It's that conditioned response. It's, how your brain is signaling to you that you're in a stressed out state, not that you don't need to do that movement anymore. Okay. It's so counterintuitive though, I know. So symptoms that are triggered by anticipation of stress. This is so big. Prior to school, work, a doctor's visit, a medical test, visit to a relative, social gathering, or during those activities. You know what's crazy? We produce so much more stress anticipating those things usually than the actual stress that's produced during the thing. I mean, I've coached people where like 2 weeks before they have to, go take care of their mom after a surgery, they're already getting back pain and they're already, anticipating it. Symptoms that are triggered by simply imagining engaging in the triggering activity. You may know this as graded exposure. You imagine yourself bending over, and if you get some sensation or pain just by imagining it, then 100% that your brain just produced that. So this is a great exercise to diagnose mind-body syndrome because it confirms the brain is actually creating pain in the absence of actually performing the activity. So I just had this happen the other day, had someone look over his shoulder. He had pain with that. And then I had him close his eyes and imagine looking over his shoulder, and he had pain with that. And then we did this exercise, graded exposure, where he imagined looking over his shoulder and it was easy and it felt good. He like copied and pasted from the one side where it felt good to the other. And then he did it in real life and didn't have pain with it. So definitely strange things happen when we visualize, and that's just such a good way to diagnose that this stuff is mind body. Symptoms are symptoms that are triggered by light touch or innocuous stimuli, such as the wind or cold. So, like light touch should not damage a tissue. Wind or cold is not causing damage that's causing pain. But if you're really sensitive to everything and the nervous system is on high alert, then even a light touch could feel painful. And even though it doesn't, it wouldn't like actually press on the muscles that are below. All right. Just an example of like how we could be overall sensitive. I might have said this before, but like I noticed in yoga doing arm balances that my muscles, when I, put my knees on my arm or something, are so tender. It's almost like hard to stand. And other people, I've asked them and I'm like, does that hurt when you do crow pose or when you do that? And they're like, no. And I think it's just because I still am that kind of person that has a little more sensitivity to some things. And so I've just kept telling my brain, it's safe, it's safe. You're not getting damaged. This is not an injury. My parents always said their necks would hurt if the car window was open and the wind was blowing on them. I always thought that was so ridiculous, right? Like our brain can associate those things and it can just make mistakes, and it can be like, oh, my neck was hurting and this wind was happening, so that's what caused it. Right? So memorize those fit criteria, or at least get familiar with them, so that when things happen and you're this observer, then you can be like, wait, it was better, or it was worse in the morning and then it went away during the day. Or when I got distracted, that's always such a good one. When I got distracted, I felt it less, or I didn't feel it, or not as much as I expected. Even if only one of those fit criteria is present, that confirms the diagnosis of mind body syndrome, that rules it in. Okay. And it only takes one clear piece of evidence for a detective such as Sherlock Holmes to crack the case. So I love thinking of it like a detective from the movies that has their notebook in their pocket, and everywhere they go, they're just like looking for clues, and they're like noticing a little crumb over there or a little fingerprint over there, right? That's how you can be to really prove to yourself that this is mind body. And it gets your brain focused on something else. You have a really active brain, probably. It's like, you know, looking all the time for all this stuff with pain, trying to figure it out. Now we're giving it a task to look for something else. Look for these fit criteria. Look for any of these things that don't fit the pattern. And even just telling the brain, you've got this job now, will decrease the amount of time that it's producing more pain and fear. Okay, so then there are some worksheets that are in the book, and you can look through, right? He says any of these that apply. So it's not like you have to necessarily go through every single exercise, but if you haven't really thought about your childhood and how your parents were, take a look at that. What were kind of the personality traits of your dad, your mom, what was the physical environment like? Um, they talk all about, even, let's see, did your mother and father have responsibility for you or care for you as a child? Oh, anyone other than your mother and father, right? So if your grandma was really involved, what about her? What about your siblings? What about money? And then any traumatic events, including bullying, right? Or taunting or teasing, deaths, moves, those are bigger ones. But, a lot of us experience sometimes it's in school that we were bullied or made fun of, or kids laughed at us, or we got an answer wrong and we were embarrassed. Okay. So even little things like that can cause our nervous system to be on high alert later. And of course, usually the more severe ones, like if there was sexual abuse or emotional or physical abuse, then of course your nervous system's even on more high guard. And then determine your core issues. So he goes through these: loss and abandonment, if you had, some incidents with loss or neglect, not fitting in, feeling pressure to succeed, feeling inferior to siblings, never feeling good enough, if you had to learn, or sorry, not learn, earn love from your parents, like you've had to always perform, or you were criticized, resentment towards family members, religious leaders, neighbors, learning to be anxious, worried, or insecure. So you might have learned that. I know my parents, I mean, they watched the news every night. They were worried about everything. That's just how they lived. So I saw that demonstrated. Um, Identifying with several family members, or one or several family members, trying to emulate them or trying to be different from them. Excuse me. And then learning that others were more important to you, that you should never put yourself first, never stand up for yourself or express your true feelings. That's an interesting one, right? That we're, especially if you think of women a lot, are cultured or taught to be caregivers, to not think of themselves, to give to others, to not be selfish, right? That can cause a lot of problems when you're putting everyone else first and not taking care of your own needs, or not standing up for yourself. It seems like maybe it's okay to just be a people pleaser and be the peacemaker, but that creates tension in our bodies and pain in our bodies and symptoms. And then there's your personality traits. You can find a common thread through all of this, right? You might have had a parent that criticized you a lot, and then you have low self-esteem, or you try to be a perfectionist. So hopefully this is starting to paint a picture for you of how this could be mind-body syndrome for you. Conflict in one's mind is a very important part of the mechanism that creates and perpetuates mind-body syndrome. Strong conscience, sometimes called an internal parent, is almost always universally found in people with anxiety, depression, and other forms of mind-body syndrome. So did you get that? Having a strong conscience, you're, a rule follower, or a sense of duty. Selfish people actually have less of the mind-body syndrome. They tend to blame others. They externalize their emotions by getting angry with others in public. They might have displays of violence or aggression. They'll be more narcissistic, he said. So everyone that's here, it's because you're a really nice person, because you have a lot of nice, well-meaning personality traits. Most people with mind-body syndrome are people who try hard, who care what others think of them, who want to be good and want to be liked. They tend to be conscientious, responsible, and hard on themselves. These personality traits are generally found in people who are kind and sensitive, the very kind of people most people would like to know and be friends with. I love how he says that, because it's like, this happens to the best people. We're trying to be nice, but we do have this internal conflict that's just subconscious. The problem is that people like that put extra pressure on themselves. They tend to get down on themselves and beat themselves up for their failings. That was me, like 1,000%. In addition, they tend to not stand up for themselves and also suppress their anger. Yeah, check, check. I didn't even realize that I had much anger, because I always felt sad instead of angry. And I think just at that subconscious level, I would just go to sadness and not anger. When external events and stressors occur, the conflict between what one needs to do to protect oneself and what a person believes he or she needs to do for others can create a great deal of internal conflict. And then that usually develops into mind-body syndrome. So an example might be like caring for an aging parent. And you might, like this example of the mom getting the hip replacement, like the daughter did want to help her mom, but also it was bringing up a lot of, memories of things she didn't like about her mom, and she didn't like to fill in this position and felt resentful and obligated. And right? So both things happen in a normal human brain. But when we're just like pushing it all down and then we're like, we've got to just be good, and then the stuff comes up in our body. So, finding connection between the core issues, life stresses, and the onset of mind body symptoms. So, there's these columns that you can go through. And remember how we went through all the mind body symptoms in step one? So, like when I was, in my college years, I had the eating disorder, potential triggering events, the stress that I had, and da da da, my perfectionism, trying to be hard on myself, emotions that were triggered, and core issues. So that was like the low self-esteem and perfectionism. And so you could go through for all of your symptoms that are on that list and think about that age and that time in your life and what was going on emotionally and not just physically. If you're not sure if you have mind body syndrome or that your life experiences are actually the cause of your symptoms of anxiety or depression, consider these steps. Make sure you've seen a doctor who's provided you with enough medical testing to rule out a purely physical cause for your symptoms. But again, be careful what they're calling physical. It's not just because I have arthritis, because people have arthritis that don't have chronic pain. So, but you got all that. You know this. This is just review. Discuss these issues with a counselor, a relative, or good friend to help you uncover the connections between the stressors in your life and your symptoms. Talking with someone else is immensely helpful. What we do in our own brain, we can think we're working through it, and then we talk to someone else and get a whole different perspective. They can see things in us that are our blind spots. Do further reading on the subject of mind-body syndrome. There's John Sarno's books called The Mind-Body Prescription or The Divided Mind. And Dr. Sarno is a pioneer in this field, and his books have an excellent description of MBS, which he calls TMS. Just to be confusing, there's so many names for this. Tension myositis syndrome is what Sarno called it. And then there's David Clark's They Can't Find Anything Wrong. David Hanscom's Back in Control. David Schechter's Think Away Your Pain. Bunch of Davids. Georgie Oldfield's Chronic Pain, Your Key to Recovery. Steve Ozanich's The Great Pain Deception. And Nancy Selfridge's Freedom from Fibromyalgia. I would just add to that list because I think this book came out before The Way Out, but the simplest, most easy to access one is called The Way Out by Alan Gordon. You probably already know of that, but if you haven't read that, definitely, it's the most current research. And if you look on my YouTube channel, I've done a book club about that one too, if you're liking these book club formats. Another thing you could do is see a doctor or mental health provider who specializes in mind-body syndrome. So there is on TMS Wiki, there is a patient-run website with up-to-date information, and it has MBS practitioners, and you can even make an appointment with Dr. Schubiner. I think it's $1,000 or two or something, but you can make an appointment with him. I think Dr. Strax is still doing sessions too. So you could actually see a doctor. There are a lot of physicians getting trained in this who know about this approach. And then, of course, as you'll see on that sheet, if you go and look, or on that list, there are practitioners. So many people are getting like certified to help you in this, including myself. Okay. So creating your evidence sheet. Oh, Mary says Back in Control is a really good book. I haven't even read that one. I haven't even read all of them. I got so overwhelmed with all the information, and I kind of went through this phase of like, I'm not going to read all of the like older books and stuff. Just stick with kind of the simple, newer stuff. Okay, but there's a new nervous system one that's come out that I bought and I'm getting through. Anyway, creating your evidence sheet. So like here, you're just going to put together all of that information that you found and make this list. Take the time to go through this. If you do, you can say, I have mind body syndrome, and you're ready to use the workbook to heal yourself. It's very likely you'll reduce or eliminate your symptoms of anxiety, depression, or any other mind-body syndrome symptom you have. You'll also, I love this, you'll also increase your understanding of yourself, learn how to gain control and mastery over your mind and body. In fact, the program has been so helpful to many participants that they recommend it to others they know, including those that do not have symptoms of mind-body syndrome. So, like, I always use this example. There's a ton of people that do coaching, go in for coaching, get coached, that don't even have these physical symptoms, but they're learning these same kind of things of, how to be yourself and how to not live in fear. And so even if nothing else, and you did this work and didn't have any change in your symptoms, it would still be a really helpful tool for you. Now, probably if you're here, it will help your symptoms as well, but you have, kind of some cool stuff to think about and look forward to. Okay, we probably don't have a ton of time for questions, but I can just check in with you. I've been looking at the chat, so thanks for contributing there. How are you guys doing? You got through all that with me? Might be kind of quiet. So I don't know if anyone has anything they want to share, impressions or questions real quick. Nope. I thought I found a new message, but someone just said thank you. You're so welcome. I will show you my little offer that I have if you are interested in taking your learning a little further with me. Oh, screen sharing, but where's my here we go. I talked about this before. I'm just going to run through it real quick. And you don't have to do, like, if this is already week 4, this 12-week offer could start now. It doesn't have to mean you've already missed 4 of the weeks and you only have the next ones. So I've put together this little package that is 3 months of my group coaching program, Alignment Academy, as well as 3 one-on-one 60-minute sessions with me. So that all is just $297. And it's a really great deal. Like I said, if you want some extra support, and those one-on-one sessions are really, really good if you want to do any kind of somatic work, and kind of diving a little in deeper to what specifically for you are your triggers or the root cause of what's going on. And I did have a client just the other day that said the best compliment to me. She just said, "You're really good at being able to, like, see to that root of what's going on," which is usually the nervous system, right? And teach me how to help with that. So, all right, you guys, thank you all for coming. Next week we'll do chapter 5. Enjoy the rest of your April Fools. Hopefully no one fools you too much, or unless you're into that. Oh, yeah. And Susan, amazing how the same techniques that work for chronic pain also work for anxiety and depression. I know it's almost unreal sounding, I think, but that's what's so cool, right? Is if you learn the techniques, you can apply them in all of those situations. All right. Thanks, guys. Have a great rest of your day. We'll see you next week. Bye.